Hi and welcome everyone. In today's video we're going to create a simple multiplayer game using Froobit JavaScript game framework. In the previous videos we covered almost all the features listed here, but we didn't cover multiplayer support. Multiplayer support in Froobit has been basic up until the version 1.1, and from the next version it is vastly improved, and you will see in this video what you can do with new multiplayer features in Froobit. So I'll quickly show you how it's done and how it looks, and we'll start coding. So this is the live example. You can see that the game is running in 3 browsers at the same time, and players can see each other. So look at the right side, you can see that the player from the left is now on the right side and it will soon be on the bottom. So this is the example that we are going to build today. So let's get started. I open main.js file. This is actually the empty point of our application. I'm instantiating empty controllers array and empty options object. Now I will call Froobit with method and call init on it to start the framework. Actually, I think I will extract this to a constant called game, and then I will call game.init. So if we now run npm run dev, you should see in the browser that the framework has initialized, and let's see, let me open the console. So you can see that Froobit is initialized, but we see nothing because we have empty controllers array. We actually did nothing. So let's create the first thing, and you are going to use Froot tool. So Froot create, and I'm going to create background. It actually created controller and entity, so let's open entity and let's add some code. So let's, for example, make a simple one color background to check if this is working, and I'm gonna register controller inside controllers array. So if everything is okay, we should see app recompiling, and yeah, we can see that we have a gray background. So now let's create our player entity and controller. That's the second thing we need, and we also have controller entity created. And let me just see. Okay, so let's add a ellipse call here and make a circle to represent our player. So it's gonna be 50 in radius, and yeah, that should be it. We just have to now register the controller. Yeah, we'll wait for the app to recompile. And yeah, we can see that the player is in the upper left corner of the screen. Now let me actually delete the background entity. We don't actually need it. I'll show you what we're gonna use for the background. So delete this. Let's go to controller, and we're actually delete all of this. And I use parallax utility from Froobit framework. So parallax allows you to create infinite background like this. So you export the default parallax, and then you call from method and you specify assets and options. So this is actually turning a controller. So let me extract assets array and options object like this, and now we have to import the asset. So you can see that the background has disappeared, and this is our new asset for the background. So this is what we are going to import right now in the main.js file. So let me quickly import this asset. And to import asset, I will create assets object, and inside images I'll place the asset. Now let's add it to options, and that's how you register assets within the framework. Next thing we need to do is we're gonna include assets here so that the parallax utility knows about the asset, and you can see that we now have full screen background. Next thing, I'm gonna create mixin. Mixins are a great way to encapsulate behavior in Froobit. So you create a simple object and call it follow mouse mixin. This mixin will actually encapsulate the movement behavior and how the item will move. Our player actually, it will move, it will follow the mouse. I defined the setup method, and now I'm defining before render method. Inside setup method, I instantiated position to be, I initialized the position to be 0 vector, since this is the initial position of our player. Now I will define velocity as get mouse. I'll subtract item position, and I will normalize it and multiply by 3, for example, so we get some speed. And now I will add a velocity to item position. So you can see we can access the actual item in the mixin, and those methods will run before render, will run each time before the render method of entity is run. So let's go back to controller and let's change this. Actually, I'll extract this to a constant and return that constant. So return player, and now we can assign the mixin that we just made with the width method. Now I say follow mouse mixin, and voila, we just added behavior to our player. And it's not moving because I think we'll need translation here. So let me call P5 translate by the item position. Item position. Okay, so let's wait for the refresh, rebuild, and let's try it now. Yeah, you can see I'm moving the mouse around and the player is following the mouse. So we encapsulated the behavior into this little mixin, and we can, if we want, reuse it in multiple places. So let's now move to server part. I created index file inside the server folder, and I just included server from Froobit server. I'll start it with the start method and an empty options object. Now let's run npm run server. So you see that's just one line of code to run the server, and server seems to be running. Let me check the game. So game is still not running in multiplayer mode. So what we have to do, again, one method call, we'll call with IO and then call init. So this will set the framework in multiplayer mode, actually in IO mode. And now you will be able to see that this is actually connecting, but let me add on server connect, and let me define this function. So this function will be called when the client connects to the server. So let's say something like new connection, and we can actually access the socket from here. So like this, and let's add socket ID. So we log the ID of the socket each time new connection is established. We see undefined. Let me refresh. You can see disconnected message, but it's still undefined. So let me check. This actually, we have to destructure the argument, and yeah, now it works. So now you can see that new connection has this socket ID, and if I refresh, we have disconnect message and connection message again. So let's now actually start creating our first IO definition. It's called player IO.js, and it will actually use to sync the fields of your player entity on the client and the fields on the server. I'll set the scope to be named player, and we have server and client fields, but those are actually empty objects for now. Now let's go to player controller and let's import our empty IO definition from shared folder. So shared / player IO. And next thing we need IO object from Froobit. So I'll import it quickly. So this is going to be used to create new connections. So I'm creating new connection, IO.connection, and I'm passing IO definition. And now we're gonna extend the behavior of our controller. Actually, we're gonna decorate our controller using compose function. So we're actually calling connection client, since this is the client part of our multiplayer game, and now I have to actually wrap the controller with it. So what this code actually does is it binds our fields on the client with the fields on the server. So the simple assignment to a field will update the value on the server. So now I'm adding camera, and I will also decorate our player controller with the camera object decorator. So this will actually achieve the effect of player being fixed and the world around it moving relative to it. And we don't have this behavior yet. I need to fix something. So we actually need to subtract mouse position from the center position, since we want our player to be in the center of the screen. So if we move the mouse around, yeah, it's still a bit off. So let me check. Yeah, I forgot to actually add camera to the background controller, since we want our background to move and our player to be fixed. So parallax needs to know about the camera. So I'll specify camera option, camera parallax, and now you can see that the background is moving and the player is moving. Player shouldn't be moving. That's probably because I forgot to delete translation. So let me delete the translation. Since camera is doing all the work, we don't need translation here, yeah. And now you can see that this is actually working. So now we can focus on the server part of application, and I will actually define server fields. So what we need on the server is position, and it will be 0 vector, so x and epsilon values are 0. And we can go to server index.js file and import this IO definition. So I'll import it up here. So I'll import it from the shared folder. Now I will register the scope IO definition under the scope. And basically each entity, each part of your application can have its own scope. And now I'm creating a scoped task. The scoped task will have access to the data only in that scope. And the data is actually defined by the IO definition. So we can set this task to run every 2 seconds, and we can console log the task is running just to check if this is actually working as expected. And you can see in the console log that this task is console logging our message. And now I will show you how you can actually access each client's data, since each client will have its copy of the fields. We will have to be able to access that data, and we currently have only one client, so you can see that we are logging one position every 2 seconds. And we can also access socket data from here for the client, for the particular client. And this is handy because out of this method, in the run method, you can declare variables and use them inside of here, so you can have some global things. And I actually have to access socket ID like this. So now we can see that it logs socket ID of the client and its data. And its data is for now only position. And okay, so what we can do next is we can actually update position so on the server. So let's make our player always move right. So we will need to actually create a position vector, and for that purpose I will import vector library called Froobit JS, and I will convert position JavaScript object into a vector object. And I will also create velocity vector, and I'll use from array method and set the x value to 5 and epsilon value to 0 so that it always moves in the right direction. Now I will add velocity to our position, and I will set the position to the object value. Okay, so we're now actually updating position every 2 seconds. We are adding 5 to x coordinate of the position, and remember, this is still not on the client. So now you can see that it is logging actually, it increments the x value by 5 every 2 seconds. Okay, and now what we are missing here, this data has to go to the client somehow. So we're gonna use server updates, and we actually have predefined tasks. So you say server tasks, and then you have full state update, and we can run this update every 5 seconds. So we will actually send this value to the client every 5 seconds. And let me check what's wrong. We actually don't need this mixing anymore, because now the position is coming from the client. We don't want our player to follow the mouse. So let me see now. The position is being updated every 5 seconds, and I'll shorten the interval so that we have some movement here. So you can see that the movement is now in the right direction, but you can see that it's not smooth as we want it to be. So in order to make it smooth, you can specify some options inside the IO configuration object. So you import IO function from the Froobit shared package and you wrap your field with IO call. And then instead of just saying the x and epsilon, you say that default value is x epsilon, and we say lerp to true. So once this recompiles, yeah, you can see that now the movement is smooth. And as you can see, that was only one line of code. The next thing we can do is we can actually calculate our mouse direction by subtracting the mouse position from the center, and I'll make a mixin for that. I'll call it mouse direction mixin, and in before render method I will actually calculate direction of the mouse, and you will see now that I'm assigning the value of mouse direction directly like this, like get mouse, and I subtract the center, and I'll again normalize the vector. So now this line of code should actually send an update to the server each time it's called. No networking code whatsoever. You don't have to use sockets here or whatever. It's done under the hood. So I'll register the mixin within here, and I will actually add this field inside the client object. So the client object actually contains fields that are set on the client and sent to the server. And server fields like position they reside on the server, and they are sent inside the update to the client. So what I have to do here, I actually have to destructure this because this is p5 vector, and now I can say item mouse direction is x epsilon value. And now we actually have access to this field on the server as well, because we bind it using IO connection. So now I will just create velocity vector from my mouse direction, and I will add that to a position, and yeah, it should work. I will shorten the task interval to like 50 milliseconds and the update interval to 250 milliseconds. And we should see our player following the mouse. So what I can also do is I can speed it up a little bit. So let's increment a few numbers, and I'll let the update run at 250 milliseconds, and you can see that this player is now moving much faster. So what I'm going to do now is I will open the second browser, and if I refresh my browser and the second browser, you can see that they're actually in sync. So we have two players at the same time seeing each other. Everything is done on the server, so the position updates are done on the server, and client interpolation and binding of the fields is done through IO connection on the client. So you've seen IO definition, and I will also actually add one more field to our IO definition. I want the player to speed up when I click the mouse. So how I do that? I can use event system from Froobit. So I actually access on event method, which I use to register event handlers. And yeah, I'm just going to register one for mouse click, and the event that I'm going to listen is mouse pressed, and so when the mouse is pressed, I'll set this value to be true. So when this event is actually executed, this value will propagate to the server, so we will be able to see the mouse clicked on the server, and I'm just going to use it here. So I'm destructuring mouse click property, and if it's clicked, I'll set the speed to 4. And if it's not clicked, I'll set speed to 2. So we have a crowded situation out here. I'll explain later. We are actually not removing those clients that disconnected. So we have an error here. Yeah, I have to actually access mouse click property on the player, and I also have to do I have to subscribe to mouse released, event, and then I have to set this to false. So when I release the mouse, I don't want to move fast anymore. So when the mouse is pressed, I want to move fast, and then yeah. Now you can see a very slight difference in speed when I click. I'll fix that quickly. So I'll set this to like 7. So now when I click, let me just synchronize those two. Yeah. Now you can see that when I click, I actually move faster. And I just assigned the boolean to my property on the player, and it propagated to the server. And I think I can merge this into a one event handler. So since this is accepting an array, I can specify both of those events and then just use toggle approach. So one thing that I also have to do, I have to remove item when it's disconnected, so other players should not be visible when they are disconnected. And let me see, if I refresh, the players can see each other, they can move around. And what I can do now is, if I close the browser of the second player, it will actually disappear. So let's try to do that. We can see that now it disappeared, and I can try and open again the application in 2 tabs. I can see the other player, and if I close the tab, yeah, it disappeared because our connection disconnect handler has executed. So that would be it for this video. We created a simple multiplayer game example using Froobit framework. We actually didn't use any networking code that you would expect. You didn't even see the HTTP server, the socket IO configuration, and lots of other stuff that's done usually when you create a game like this. So Froobit gives you this very easy API for creating multiplayer experience, and everything is synced just by assigning a value to a field, and this propagates the server. And yeah, that will be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.